All right. I think I'd like to call the meeting to order. I think we've got 30 seconds, but I'm in a rush. What can I say? So first thing we'll do is I'd like to recognize that we are actually doing this work, trying to make good decisions for land on land that the Shaanu and the Sooke have been making good decisions for a long time, and we hope continue will do so. Now I'd like to move to the approval of the agenda. If I could have someone to move that. Okay, Ellen, seconded by Councilor Beddoes. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay, we don't have any public, so I think we're just gonna glide over the public question and comment period and move right into reports. Mr. Holden. Oh, sorry, Mr. Blue.
Thank you. I'm just going to make sure this is working. Oh, we need a moment.
Yeah, we don't have anything on screen over here, so. Oh, there we go.
Okay. We're ready to roll. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Holden Blue. I'm one of the senior planners here with the District of Sooke. And I'm here to present to you a non-adhering residential use application at 6626 Helgeson Road. So a little bit first with some site context. So this is a 1.7 hectare parcel, which is bisected by Helgeson Stream. Property zoned RU3 small scale agriculture. It has an agriculture OCP designation, and it's within the Agricultural Land Reserve or ALR. So that's kind of why we are here today. This application is triggered by the fact that this land is in the ALR. The properties outside of the SSA or sewer specified area and outside the district's growth boundary. It's currently serviced by septic. However, the applicant has noted they intend at some point to connect to municipal sewer, but that'll be a separate process outside of this application. Currently on the property, there is a single family dwelling, uncovered deck with a pool, an accessory detached garage, some gardening areas, and the family living on the property keeps some ducks on the property as well currently. It should be noted that there is a covenant registered on title for a setback to the stream. So at the time the original home was constructed, there was a covenant registered to ensure it was set back an appropriate distance to protect that stream. With regard to adjacent land uses to the northeast and west, all those properties are in the ALR and also zoned RU3. And to the south, we have some R2 medium lot residential properties. So a little bit on the Agricultural Land Commission Act, because as I mentioned, this is kind of why we're here. This relates to lands within the ALR. So the subject property is in the ALR, as I noted, and subject to the Agricultural Land Commission Act and its regulations. Specifically, Section 20.1 of the Act limits the size of a principal residence in the ALR to 500 square meters. Section 25 of the Act allows for an application for a non-adhering residential use in the ALR and notes that it must first be considered by local government council prior to proceeding to the Agricultural Land Commission for consideration. So council must determine to forward the application based on alignment with municipal plans, policy, and regulations. So that's really what we're considering here. Should council forward the application to the ALC may approve or deny or approve with conditions, etc. If approved by the ALC, a formal building permit will be required. I've noted council here because I mean, essentially this will eventually go to council for authorization, but we're bringing it here first just as part of our process. So onto the proposal itself. So the applicant is proposing a principal residence greater than 500 square meters. They're proposing an addition to the existing single family home. So on your screen, I can't really point to it here, but I've tried to highlight it. So what this includes is a second story addition, which will include a secondary suite. There's also an uncovered rooftop patio. However, that does not contribute to the overall floor area for the purpose of this calculation. So the footprint of the actual home won't expand. And the applicant has provided a little bit of a rationale here, noting that the expansion is to accommodate family members living on the property. And then the applicant has also noted an interest in establishing agricultural activity on the property. They've noted some fruiting orchards or keeping of livestock. So just wanted to note the site plan here as well. So everything in blue is the proposed addition. So as you can see, nothing's actually, again, the footprint's not expanding. There's a small portion at the front of the home that's being enclosed to accommodate access up to the second story. So a little bit on the policy side of things. So as I mentioned earlier, the property has an agriculture OCP designation. So the OCP's goal and intent of this land use designation is to protect existing agricultural lands. This land use designation supports residential densities, which aligned with the ALC, which I've noted previously as well. The ALC permits single family and secondary suites, however, limits their size to 500 square meters total. Section 4.5.2 of our agriculture and food security policies in the OCP also supports a no net loss with any land use decisions. So with regard to this application, the existing footprint of the home is not being expanded, therefore not taking up additional agricultural land. So a little bit on the zoning bylaw aspect of this. The property is zoned RU3, small scale agriculture. So in this zone, agricultural and residential uses in the form of single family dwellings, suites or small suites are permitted. As I've noted, secondary suites are permitted as accessory use. Secondary suites are also permitted as per the ALC regulations. In our zoning bylaw, the proposal appears to meet our secondary suite regulations, which limits the size to 90 square meters or 40% of the principal dwelling floor area. Based on the application that's been currently submitted, all of the zoning regulations have been met, such as parcel coverage, height, setbacks, etc. However, should this application proceed through the ALC, a full building permit review, which would include a zoning review, would be conducted. So we do as well have an agricultural plan. I just want to touch on it briefly. There's a lot of information in it. At a high level, it kind of provides policy recommendations for agricultural protection in Sooke. Also provides a bit of an overview of agriculture in Sooke at the time that this was adopted. So in looking through this policy, there's no policy specifically related to single family homes or suites. However, it does note in the plan that it recognizes the zoning bylaw permits single family homes and suites within the ALR. So this application, like all of our land use applications, was referred out to relevant external agencies as well as internal departments for any comment. So I'll briefly kind of summarize. This was included as part of the agenda package as an attachment 5. So our building division just provided general comments related to code compliance for secondary suites. A full building permit review will be conducted should this be approved by the ALC. Our engineering division has provided some advisory comments related to inclusion in the sewer service area. The Ministry of Agriculture has provided a few comments as well, noting additional agricultural land is not being taken up. However, they've noted that it appears the property is not farmed to an intensity to warrant a larger principal residence. We refer out to Sooke Nation, some advisory comments regarding when construction starts related to any excavation or sewer connection, to have somebody on site, and provided some guidance on sediment and erosion control measures with any construction. The archaeology branch also provided some comments. There are no known agricultural or archaeological sites on the property. However, notes that a high potential for them to exist on the property. They've provided some advice on what to do should archaeological sites be discovered. And this information was passed on to the applicant for their consideration. So in conclusion, staff recommends that the Land Use and Development Committee recommend council authorize the application to proceed to the ALC for consideration based on the following. No additional agricultural land is necessary to accommodate the addition. And the proposed addition and use are permitted within the district's zoning bylaw. So with that, there's a recommendation for the committee to consider and here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the motion, and we're going to move the motion, and then we're going to discuss the motion. We don't have to adopt the motion. This is simply so we have something to discuss. All right. So that the Land Use and Development Committee recommend that the council authorize the non-adhering residential use application to proceed to the Agricultural Land Commission for consideration to accommodate an increase to the maximum floor area of a principal residence of 500 square meters to 520 square meters at 6626 Helgeson Road, legally described as Lot A, Section 34, Sooke District, Plan 47014, except part in Plan VIP 67948. By someone to second that. Council second. So now, I guess we can start with questions for staff. I have one very quick question. Can we explain to everyone what non-adhering means?
Basically doesn't meet the requirements that have been outlined.
In this case of the ALC, correct?
That is correct.
So I just wanted to make sure we were clear why it wasn't sticky. So any questions for staff? And that'll be through the chair. Thank you. Rob, I forget your last name.
Rob Berry.
Okay, how do we want to go? We want to go with first names or
I'm fine with that.
Rob? Okay, Rob.
Thank you. So the agricultural land use, as defined by the RU3, is that ever monitored? Or is that looked at in any way to see if they actually are using the land for agricultural use? And is there any way to monitor that into the future? And is this part of the pending for the application to continue using it as RU3?
So staff, please.
So through the chair, from our end, I guess there wouldn't be any sort of monitoring. I know the ALC does have a compliance and enforcement team. I mean, a residential use is permitted here as well as agriculture. So they don't necessarily have to be using it for agriculture to operate or have a single family home on the property. Does that answer your question?
I can add to that if you like.
Sure.
The ALC, although it has a team, does not have much of a compliance, not a lot of compliance muscle. Most of that is left up to local government to deal with in the application of all this stuff. They just don't have the resources to actually check and see whether or not people are farming and how much they're farming and so on and so forth. It's actually up to local government to mostly do that stuff.
Second question is on the family member use. On my personal experience, we brought a property that was 10 years ago, roughly 3.5 acres. The applicant took off roughly half an acre to build a home for their family, their son. Consequently, they built the house, they moved into it, sold the property to us, non-family, and their son lives somewhere else. There's nobody checking on that. So I'm just thinking, does the application residing with a family member have anything to do with the compliance?
Through the chair, no, I don't believe so. They've just noted that in the application that this project is to accommodate the family members living together. Yeah. It has nothing to do with the use.
I can add to that as well. The ALC has sometimes in their decisions allowed for residential suites above, for example, farm buildings for family. So it's possible that if the applicants know this, that they're basically mentioning the family piece because of that. Because it would actually, maybe see favor with the ALC in terms of accepting their application. In terms of, again, monitoring any of that stuff, there just isn't a whole lot of monitoring happening as far as that goes. Okay, nobody really has the means to check up. In terms of what you were describing, it sounds like they did a subdivision, whereas this is actually a duplexing sort of above the building. So they're not subdividing, obviously, because it's one single building. So it's a little bit of a different situation. Any other questions? Councilor Pearson or Kevin? No, I'll go with Councilor Pearson.
An emotional issue about, making it for family, which we all support families, but that can't be part of an ALC decision. It has to be, it has to be pragmatic and comply with the ALC regulations. You're allowed a 90-meter square meter residence as secondary on any ALC package less than 40 hectares. So that's supposed to be aiding for farm workers and things like that. So there's a lot of people look at all of the opportunities that are in the ALC and, for lack of a better word, loopholes, right? So we have to be cognizant of that. So as a committee, it's important to flesh it out. And maybe we don't make a real complex decision on it because it seems like a no-brainer. But what it should do is when you see the word ALC, we should be cognizant of the fact there's a lot of regulations and there's a lot of expectations by the province to provide food security. So important big issues, even though that this seems like a fairly small thing. So I have a question though. The archaeological assessment, if it's deemed, because it in the report, it said it's likely it could have significant archaeological impact, or there's a high potential for archaeological impact. That's what it says, high potential. 20 to 40 week turnaround on that application. Does the applicant know that it's a potential, if there's anything that's questionable? 20 to 40 weeks, that's an extremely long time.
Through the chair, the information that's in that referral was just passed along for the applicant to kind of reach out as necessary, as advisory.
Right.
Obviously, with any advisory comment, they could be assuming that there could be additional time added if anything were discovered. In this case, there isn't anticipated to be any excavation unless there were some plans that would have to change as part of their code compliance. But yeah, we simply just provide the comments as advisory and allow the applicant to do their due diligence in that case.
Right. And the second question to the chair is the zoning review. Before the application, who conducts that zoning review?
Through the chair, staff would conduct that review.
That's us.
That's correct. Yeah. And then if, again, part of building permit, if something else were to be flagged or changes were required, we would conduct an additional zoning review at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Through you to Mr. Blue. So both the archaeology branch and the Sooke have recommended an archaeological survey of the site. So that's not a requirement. Would this be part of your directions going forward to the app?
Through the chair, my understanding is that we have not been requesting that currently. However, perhaps I could defer to Manager of Planning Jaden here to speak to that further.
Yeah, so as Mr. Blue was mentioning, we wouldn't require it unless there was perhaps earth disturbance or a development permit that would go along with some future construction plans. And in that case, there would be various stages of archaeological assessment. So it would start with the desktop review, preliminary field reconnaissance, and then monitoring on site. If they came across artifacts or something, then that would trigger a heritage permit. And then that's the longer process essentially, and work would have to be stopped at that time.
Okay, so I see that this archaeology branch, an eligible consulting archaeologist only if there is excavation required. Okay, good. Thank you. I finally sunk in there. I see the Sooke is also recommending that the district, as part of its processes, do require archaeology assessments at the same time as geotechnical. Any comments on that?
Through the chair, again, I believe our standard process is to not include them. I'm not sure if there has been discussion to include them at all.
Or-
Sorry, the assessments. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And finally, so this is a 500-meter squared structure as it stands, and there'll be an additional 20 square meters in the build out of the second floor. And I see the ministry is making it very clear that the current level of production does not warrant a larger principal residence. However, it's clear that the applicants do intend to increase production with potential goats and pigs and veggie farming, flowers, etc.
Through the chair, just to clarify, the current residence is approximately 310 square meters. Yeah. Apologies for the confusion there. That's correct.
I'd just like to comment on your question in terms of, or your comment. I know that the ALC does not recognize future farming as anything, because essentially they've been burned too many times with people saying, yes, let us build this additional housing and we'll do all this farming, but then it never happens. So they simply do not recognize future farming. You have to prove that you're farming now, or that you've increased farming on the property and now require more labor and more people. So that's anyway. Ms. Ritz.
Thank you. Through the chair, I do have a couple of questions. So the reason we're here, would it be fair to say that their architect kind of misunderstood the ALR rules? Because they certainly could have designed to 500 and then we wouldn't need to be here. So we're talking about an extra 200 square feet that it seems.
Square meters.
It's 20 square meters, which is about 215 square feet. Sorry, I had to do all this calculation because square meters. So we're really here to do a bit of a favor. Would that be wrong to think that? Like, they could have just designed a house to 500, but they designed it to 520 due to a misunderstanding.
Through the chair, yeah. I mean, the discussion is always had with the applicant to comply with the regulations. Any additional process adds time to them. However, just in chatting with the applicant, it sounds as though this design met their needs and they wanted to proceed with the application.
Okay. So what do taxpayers receive? Like, do we get extra taxes now that there's a secondary suite? Do we get a trail? Like, is there any benefit to Sooke residents to give them this benefit?
Through the chair, not sure how tax revenue would be increased in this case. However, the secondary suite is a permitted use. Like, we don't have a size requirement for an overall principal residence. We do have a size requirement for secondary suites, which they meet. However, for the purpose of our regulations, this meets them. It's just the consideration of the ALC size requirement. So I guess we wouldn't necessarily be in a position to be asking for anything in addition. It's not like a zoning application or something like that where there's an opportunity perhaps to have that discussion because of the fact that they meet the requirements of our regulations.
And then last week on council, there was an application for an ALR exemption for 6620, which is I believe right next door. Is there any relationship between that, or is this simply a coincidence? There's the solar panels. They wanted to have ground solar panels, which would infringe on ALR land. It's interesting they came up.
Yeah, through the chair, there's no relationship.
No relationship.
No.
Okay. Couple more. So secondary suites can be used as short-term rentals. Like, if you have a secondary suite in your primary residence, it can be used as a short-term rental. So again, maybe to Rob's, is there any way to monitor that a short-term suite doesn't doesn't just become doesn't add to housing, but really is just accommodation for visitors.
Can I take this? Okay, so as it happens, it's just not illegal to do that. It's
Right.
perfectly permissible, even within the new provincial regulations, for someone to actually have a secondary suite that they Airbnb as long as it's their principal residence. So we don't have a role in terms of restricting or monitoring because it's actually perfectly legal
Right.
at the provincial level, which supersedes anything we might want to do.
Correct, but just the emotional thing that this is for family and we want an exemption. I'm
Uh,
just asking if there's any way to, it doesn't seem there is.
The family thing is almost irrelevant,
Okay.
except if the ALC was to say, well, we've done this before and therefore there's a precedent,
Right.
but that's up to them. That's not our problem at all. Does staff have anything further to add to that or?
So it's just a possibility that it might not.
Yeah, through the chair, it's certainly a possibility. They would have to go through standard business licensing applications and there'd be a review from planning to ensure that the use is permitted on the site. But yeah, we don't have any restrictions in place for the RU3 zone where a secondary suite is permitted
Okay,
and vacation accommodation unit, I should say. Thank you.
okay. And then two more, sewer versus septic. So they are planning to join the septic. No, a sewer, sorry. They're planning to join the sewer. And if not, they would increase their septic. So does that use up ALR land by increasing their septic?
Through the chair, potentially, yes. I mean, again, these considerations would be determined at time of building permit. And something that we've advised the applicant to discuss with the ALC to see how this would impact. But again, we're just considering the residential component at this point. If there was a substantial change, perhaps what could happen is that they would have to go back to the ALC. However, this information has been relayed to the applicant and understanding the risks.
And then my last one, I guess, are we concerned about setting precedents? Every decision is a decision on its own. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, for the dollar value, when they put a suite up, another story on the house, the assessed value goes up. So we will get some more tax dollars. It won't be terrific tax dollars, but there will be an increase. And my feeling is that when you put a second story on the house, if you try and choppy change it, knock it down by 20 square meters and stuff, it doesn't fit. So the whole idea is they just go up. So I think for us we just need to be looking at is, are we okay with another suite going in there? So me, I'm happy with that because it's one more accommodation in this community without affecting the footprint of the agricultural land. And if the family takes advantage of it, I understand a lot of families have their 25-year-old sons and daughters living with them because they can't afford to go anywhere else. So this is a great shortstop. So I'll be supporting this.
Thank you. Ms. Cummings, have anything you'd like to ask or add?
Just also thinking from maybe why they had to go up the extra bit. It could be it lined up nice with structural walls or something. So maybe it just made more sense financially too. Possibly I haven't seen the plans or anything. So it could be to help keep the project cheaper too or something. I run into that issue sometimes as well during plans. But yeah, it seems good and adds extra space for people to live in the community. And yeah.
Thank you very much. Any more questions at all at this point? No? Okay, then I'll make a few comments just because seriously, this is just like almost my hobby. Yeah, my comment would be that there's a real chicken and egg thing in terms of density on farmland and agricultural production. So right now, the ALC is struggling with how do you actually ensure agricultural production when you put the density, but without the density, you can't actually get the production going. So on a lot of small parcels, what's happening is instead you're ending up with very large homes, a few chickens, some horses, whatever. And effectively the land is actually out of agricultural production anyway, because you've got essentially a mansion and a big yard. And on top of that, what happens in that case is that because that flock of chickens may actually allow you to achieve farm tax status, which only requires like $2,500, that 5-acre property with a 500 square meter home is now paying less taxes than the single family residential lot right next to them. So there's a lot of complicated weirdness in terms of this stuff. I would support this application simply because they're not actually building on additional land. I think the only precedent I'd be really concerned about is that if you start actually saying, we just allow second stories all the time, then the loophole that develops there is that people might decide, well, I'm going to put my 500 square meters as wide as I can. And in the future, I'll go for an application to add on a second story. But, I think that the ALC is pretty savvy to that. I don't think we need to worry about it too much. But their main concern is that they've been under attack by developers large and small since they've started to basically build more density and more housing, because housing pays way better than growing carrots. If you think about, 500 square meters of land and putting a house, you can probably rent that for, $5,000, $10,000, who knows? You put carrots on that, you're making a couple $100. So it's just they're under constant assault. And you need to put yourself into their mindset when you're thinking about that sort of thing. Anyway, at this point, if there's no further questions or comments, I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? The motion carries. Okay. Let me just have a look at the agenda. Thank you. I think I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Oh, we could have a roundtable discussion. I'm not going to allow it to be very long. I will assure you of that. But do you wish to? Actually, we have a motion to add to the agenda roundtable discussion, because that's not on the agenda. There we go. All in favor of a roundtable? There we go. Okay, we'll add that to the agenda. Thank you very much. All right, now that we've got that on the agenda, Councillor Beddoes, you're always last. Let's just take you. Go for.
People saying, well, it's obvious, well, it's not obvious. And you learn by asking questions, and I appreciate everybody's question here. And that's good, because as the chair said, the Agricultural Land Commission is this weird entity that we deal with from time to time that seem to have a great deal of power. But our job is to just see if this is okay, stand on. They make the decision. I appreciate everything.
Councillor Bateman and Councillor Pearson.
Yeah. So thank you. That was a nice little, for me, that was an appetizer, and I was hoping to see a slightly larger agenda, but this roundtable discussion could stretch out. But I just, I'm curious about this committee and how we move forward. I know Mr. Marshall has referred to us as an advisory planning council or committee. Applications, OCP amendments, rezoning applications, development permits, and ALR exclusions, or ALR matters, as we've dealt with today. I'm curious to know how the OCP planning will be coming forward, and whether this committee will be given first look at documents as we roll forward. And yeah, so there's a question.
Okay, so can staff comment on that, please?
Through the chair, I believe that is the intent, would be to bring forward any work to this committee prior to council. And that what that looks like will have to be determined as we move forward and we start to continue to ramp up work on that. But that is the intent.
Another question then would be, okay, this was the one item we had today. What can we anticipate next month, for example? Do you have a number of items floating to the top of the of your work schedules that will require this committee's involvement?
Yeah, through the chair, absolutely. Yeah, so I think from the last council meeting, you saw about 5 or 6 items that went. So that's kind of created this awkward lapse, I think, just with how this committee meeting schedule has been set up, just a week apart, essentially, from the council meeting. So yeah, we'll see more consistent applications and larger agendas than this going forward. But yeah, on my list, I think there's one item so far, but I'd have to check in with staff and just see how that's going to shape up going forward.
Can you give us any? Okay, one last one. Any?
Yeah, all the time. It's just the last.
I'm just curious that in terms of development permits, can you give us a little preview of what we might be anticipating, or major rezonings? Just a little teaser.
Through the chair, I'd rather just leave it to the meeting and the published agenda and reports. Yeah.
Thank you. Just a couple of notes. Thanks for the great questions. I know it kind of it seemed like a small issue, but it does have big impact. ALC is a very important part of all communities in British Columbia. It's important to the provincial government, as I said earlier. I hope that we can have a less formal relationship in the committee structure. That way it allows for more freewheeling kind of conversation, exploring kind of ideas and bouncing things off. We're kind of finding our way with this committee structure right now. And the intent is a little bit less looser than the actual former council chamber, so we can bounce ideas off and we did it. We had a fairly formal meeting today, thanks, Chair. But I would look forward to more kind of interactive discussions and your input. Your input is extremely valuable to us. A couple of points that came for me that I'm not sure is our relationship with the Sooke Nation that should be explored. Where and when. I heard that, we don't have to ask them, but, if we formalize that process, because their letter specifically talked about, excavation for a septic tank and sewer and things like that. So we should be really cognizant of that, and we should really grasp that and understand it, because I think if we're consistent, it actually enhances our relationship with Sooke. Like, so that we're always going to ask, not it's discretionary. Maybe we'll ask this time, maybe we won't. But if we have it as part of our process, it goes a long ways towards reconciliation and what our intent is. And I feel that's important for this committee to sort of maybe flesh some of those ideas out, like in an application process. So anyways, that was just food for thought for me. And understanding that the ALC, what that relationship is with the municipalities, we can, and I hope that they don't just rubber stamp something when it goes in there. I hope that they actually review that process. To your point, they specifically said, well, you haven't impacted on the ground floor or on the outside the foundation. It's all being contained within that footprint. Well, does that mean it's automatic? I don't know. But the questions that you two asked in the beginning are relevant. Because people do look for loopholes in the system, and our job is to be the gatekeeper of some of those loopholes. So that's it. Comment, but
Thank you very much. I'm just going to quickly, it's something you said, brought something that I'd like to ask staff about. I believe that we already have connection with the land guardians with development permits and such. Where is it automatic? I know that it's automatic in some cases, but where are they automatically contacted?
Through the chair, my understanding is any land use application
Anywhere.
is referred to Sooke Nation.
Automatically through staff as
That's
part of our
correct.
process. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's good news. So on the road to reconciliation, thank you. And also following up on Councillor Pearson's comments, I very much like his idea of something more informal. I think staff should keep maybe in mind that if there are any ideas you'd like to do more of a workshop type of approach, I think this body could probably work very well in a workshop. I mean, obviously facilitated and with a goal and all the rest, but a workshop format might be something that we could consider in terms of what Councillor Pearson was suggesting.
I think it's laid out in our
Mhm.
book here, how the procedures go. I think the formal part is just like first name instead of Councillor Gal, and I prefer that myself. Ellen. So I'd like to use first names. I'd like to be a little bit more informal, and I think it frees up the dialogue. When we get into a regular council meeting, we'll sort of have to use the titles.
Okay, so hold on.
I think that's what I'm interested. Oh, crap. Did I miss all that?
Yep.
Oh, well, but it's a round table. I don't have to say it again.
Okay, so as a chair, I'm going to use my judgment in terms of how formal and informal I want to keep it.
You're the chair.
And I do like the idea that if people want their first names, that works just fine for me. In terms of something like a workshop can still be an opportunity for me. We have expertise in the room with our members here. They're not actually on council. I think this is something that staff can actually make use of if it seems useful. And that's up to us to figure out what we want to do with. Mr. Barry, comments?
Always. How far along are you with the OCP, and would we be able to bring that forward next week into a partial discussion just to get that rolling on our behalf?
Through the chair, currently we are still reviewing the document based on the report that was brought forward at the end of January, identifying some key themes and preparing for what engagement might look like and bringing that forward to this committee relatively soon, probably not as early as next week, definitely not as early as next week, I can tell you that. But as those, I mean, information could be shared at these meetings kind of as we progress more informally, perhaps. I can't speak for my manager and sort of his work planning, but something maybe as we are getting closer to sort of like deliverables could perhaps be an update or something like that.
Okay, so what I hear is there might be an appetite on the part of the committee for ongoing updates on progress on the OCP as a part of the agenda. So simply put that as a part of the agenda, update on progress on the OCP. With that, okay, thank you very much. Ms. Ritz. Oh,
When the first OCP came out many years ago, I was very involved with that, and I had lots of family and friends and colleagues put a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of energy into that. And I thought it was quite successful. And then we come around to OCP number 2, and it seemed like there's a lot of energy and time put into that when we have the old one is just sitting there. It looked to me like 90% complete. I don't understand why we didn't take the old one and just bring it onto the table and rework it, add the new pieces into it, et cetera. And it just feels like the new one's cumbersome. I've read every word, every page, and had to take wake-up pills for it. It was difficult to get through, difficult read. And I just didn't find it very beneficial. I'm trying to think like a counselor. I'm trying to think like a planner. I'm trying to think like the mayor. I'm trying to think like all the different people who would use this plan, right? And I just found it cumbersome and wordy, and there was nothing factual in it. I could really sink my teeth in and go, that's what the community is going to look like, because it was left up to interpretation. And you got a developer interpreting it, or a farmer interpreting it, or you know, a tree hugger or something. You're going to have different interpretations on every single page, depending on who's reading it. And I didn't see it defined. And that's kind of my big question is on this.
I'll just speak to that briefly. So, I mean, staff are reviewing all the feedback that we received. We have a very limited scope with this project. And we'll bring it back to the LUDC for further discussion at that time. But yeah, I'd highly recommend that the committee members and the public review the report that went to council that kind of goes over our approach to the OCP project and how we intend to make those changes as per the provincial legislation and the minor amendments or whatnot to address the comments that we heard back from the public and other stakeholders. So happy to have that conversation at another time.
I will comment on that myself. I agree 110% with what you just said. And I think staff is well aware, because I've shouted it from the rooftops, that there's way too much redundancy. It's not clear. The language is not clear. And mostly it's an editing project, because when I actually read through it, there's nothing that seems too terribly off base in terms of what it represents in terms of the vision of the community. It's just that it's hard to understand. I think that the first thing to do is just to slim it way down without losing any content, but slim it way down and make it far clearer. And I think that's what you're, yeah. Ms. Ritz.
Yeah, I can speak to that too, because I was the chair of the advisory committee for the new one. And, you know, looking, you know, we, as a committee, we had limited involvement. There was a professional putting it together, but looking back, if I could have started from the beginning, we would have just taken the old one and edited it, because it's actually not so different, but it just looks different. It reads different, and it freaked people out. And so it just delayed the process. If we could have just said, okay, we're just changing page 3 and page 7 and we're putting in new pictures, and I think that would have speeded the process up. So if I could go back and redo it, I would say we just take the old one and do a jury revision so people aren't thinking they're looking at a completely different document. Yeah, but anyway. And then in terms of slimming it down, we as a group wanted to, but there was actually pushback on that. No, this needs to be included. This is a mandatory requirement, things like that. So, but what I was going to say is that it would be great if we could have a copy of that recommendation that was sent to council. I'm not sure where to find it. Jaden?
Sorry, the recommendation.
A report to
Yeah.
council?
Yeah. So is the OCP? Sure, I can do that. Absolutely. Thank you.
That would be great. And then also through this committee, I'm just wondering, as we, something that, I'm just wondering if, I've seen a couple of times where people have asked for secondary housing, and my concern is with Bill 44 and the short-term rental regulations, it kind of has a loophole that any secondary suite in a residence can be used as short-term housing. And in a lot of cases, that's more, of a financial benefit for people. They don't want the hassle of long-term tenants and stuff like that. So there are these little loopholes, and I'm just wondering if it's something that keeps coming up, if it's way our committee can kind of address these things, and maybe can there be zoning changes that protect so that when we build a secondary suite, it actually is for long-term housing and not unnecessary. So I would like to see maybe if there's a recurring kind of themes, loopholes that keep coming up, maybe there's a way that we could address it.
I will comment on that. Again, the difficulty is that up to this point, people could just do short-term rentals whenever they wanted to, and then, along comes Bill 44 and so on and so forth. Now it's being restricted, and it's being specifically restricted. If it's part of your primary residence, you can go ahead and do it, type of thing. You're talking about putting further restrictions on that when people are already screaming bloody murder about the existing regulations. And the other issue really is that in Sooke, we don't have enough tourist accommodations. And that is an issue. I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here, but not a big one, and suggest that one of the bigger problems, quite frankly, and it's something that we could consider is, and this will be advocacy work, is that our tenant regulations and our rules in terms of tenant and landlord relations are simply not adequate. There's a huge amount of unused stock simply because people are afraid to rent out because they've had a horrifying experience or know someone who has. There's an enormous amount of affordable housing simply fallow, doing nothing. And it's because people are not willing to rent. I think that the reason people do short-term rentals is because they're afraid of doing long-term rentals. And that means that we need to address the legislation around those things, as opposed to restricting, what type of tenancy arrangement you want to have. I think that there's a big advocacy piece that needs to be done at DBSM and further in terms of actually tightening things up and making it so that you can actually have safe tenants and you can get rid of them if they're bad tenants. Also, we need leases that stick, and we need to make sure that bad landlords don't kick out good tenants and put them on the streets. So it's two sides, two things. But right now we have people that are being homeless for no reason, and people leaving their space fallow because they're afraid. And that's not what we're talking about here. Wouldn't address it and wouldn't change anything substantially, is my suggestion. It's coming.
Yeah, just another kind of in the whole suite discussion that there's so many like illegal suites around Sooke too. I see it all the time of people put in suites in the last 15 years, and I would say half the houses of subdivisions have all these illegal suites. And I think having a way to maybe legalize those and work with the fire departments, and in lots of cases it's adding interconnected smoke detectors or smaller things that could help benefit like the taxes, and have it on record for the fire department that there's a whole nother residence in there. Or I think there could be other aspects along those lines too. Yeah.
Would staff care to comment on that? What's our situation with regards to essentially illegal suites? I believe that we're in a situation where unless someone complains about it, we don't do anything about it, but I'm not, could you
Yeah,
comment?
through the chair. So generally, yeah, we'd be monitoring that, and by law enforcement, we'd be getting calls, and we would investigate at that point if there is a complaint from a neighbor. So that's generally what our trigger is for investigation. Otherwise, yeah, we have a standard building permit process and business licensing process for secondary suites or for vacation accommodation units. And yeah, we're kind of monitoring those numbers as these new regulations have been put in place. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Just a comment about suites and something that is coming our way is the other part of that is the unfairness for the wastewater, the cost of the wastewater system. So as you may know, right now, it's a parcel tax that's paid by the resident, and some have an additional tax for the secondary suite if it's been registered with the district, but the others do not. It's one fee for all. So the unfairness part is that you may have a one single family house with a household of two paying the same as their neighbor that may have a suite with six people. So the debt for our wastewater plant has been paid off, and part of it now, as I understand, or what may be coming our way is to switch to water consumption. That's what's done elsewhere throughout BC. So then those that are reducing their use it's obviously based on winter rates, but then there is a way then of capturing that use because there's all sorts of hookups that everyone is paying. So just
Thank you.
another piece of
yeah.
work coming your way.
Actually, that speaks to trying to pay for things and the whole pay-per-use idea. One of the things that we do with fees and so on and so forth is trying to actually pass the cost of, for example, services to the people who use the services as much as possible. So when we're making decisions that we're often looking at the financial implications for, well, almost always the financial implication for our mostly residential taxpayers, because that's most of our tax base. And this comes up all the time in different ways, different forms. Who's paying and why and how? At this point, though,
Is there an opportunity for round two?
nope,
Input
Nope.
on what I've heard?
nope, nope.
I've got information that,
What's that?
that would be of value.
You
to
may
the
make a
committee.
further comment at this point in time. if
Okay,
you
I'll make a
wish.
further comment. Thank you. So I just note that secondary suites were discussed by the previous iteration of this committee back in May 2021. So it'd be worthwhile to, if indeed there's an appetite to explore that further, so I would agree with Ron that, there's so much work has been done on so many reports let's not waste work that's been done to date and try to reinvent wheels. And I just need to comment on this official community plan, which I would agree 50% with what you said, not 110 or 100. I agree it's a bit of an eye glazer, but that's what these documents are. It also is packed with what I believe to be really substantial material, particularly the implementation plan, the DPs, the land use implementation portions of it. So I look forward to seeing it slimmed down to a degree, but not losing these essential components, because it is good material there. Even, yeah, no dose though is necessary. If reading the whole thing at once. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman. I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor Bateman, seconded by Mr. Barry. All in favor? Thank you very much, everyone.